Last week I read the story about Freedom, the runaway cheetah, and then the last page of that story was missing. I don't know if you guys remember that. The last page was missing. I'm like, oh my God, how did the printer mess up and he didn't give the last page? So then I was searching for the original file and I found it, and that's actually how the story ended. And then I remembered that the boy didn't want to tell the whole story. He didn't want to share the whole story of what was going on with him because it was very personal. So he wanted to end it like that because it was in a group. And he didn't want to share every last little thing, you know. So, but what was driving him to really run underneath those horrible feelings was that he was experiencing some voices in his head telling him that if he didn't run, that, you know, they would kill him, basically. So he was running from the voices, but he only felt comfortable sharing that he's feeling lonely and depressed and all that. But I'd forgotten that we left it out because I knew his whole story. I'm like, oh, I thought we forgot the punchline, you know, but we didn't. So I don't have any more to read. I promised I was going to read the end of it, but I don't have that last page because that was a private page. Okay, do you have a question, Vilas? Okay.
I would be very curious to know why I have trouble getting into the shoes of this boy and understanding why it is so personal that he didn't want to share it in a group, that he was hearing voices that told him to run.
Well, there's a big stigma against mental health issues, especially psychosis. And basically, they're going to call him schizophrenic. And he wants to be a cool teenage boy. So it's better to be like, I'm just a little depressed, a little lonely, and it's kind of cool to run. But then to say, oh, you know, I mean, kids will make fun of you for that.
Okay.
Maybe not in that hospital setting, but in the real world, you get bullied for that, you get made fun of.
Oh, okay. I understand. So he knew that this is some kind of disease and not normal to hear this.
Once we uncovered it. But when he came to the hospital, he didn't understand even what his problem was. That's why it took the whole story for it to come out. And then I'm like, wait, what? And then he actually said, well, it's actually not really loneliness, depression. I'm feeling lonely and depressed because of this. And I'm like, oh. You know, so we uncovered it, and then we got him on the right medicine, and he was very calm.
Okay.
But he didn't even know it. But then when we were writing the story, it was also too fresh. He hadn't even digested it. He just realized what happened. You know? Just because it's happening to you doesn't mean you realize what that is when it's happening. In fact, you believe that it's real. That's why he was acting on it. Yeah. Yeah, it feels very embarrassing and ashamed, and there's a big stigma against that. Yeah. Anything else before we move?
It's from a few lessons ago. Is that still okay?
Sure. Is that on?
It's from a few lessons ago when you were sharing about your father passing away, and how you had, been raised an atheist, and then with the blue light, it was my understanding that this was like almost an epiphany to turn you to God. But I was wondering whether you can explain how you can come from atheism to realizing, there's something beyond, or there is a God in the picture.
For me, it was just a felt experience, I mean, in my mind, I thought the body's just going to drop and that's it, you just die. But when I saw like this blue light and I felt something, and I was like, whoa, he must have something moved, something happened. I don't know what the heck that was. There's some energy, like it was just enough for me to be curious. If a million people told me, I wouldn't believe it, because that's how I was raised. But if I have experience myself of something going on, it wasn't that his body just dropped and there was nothing that happened. So it made me enough to start asking questions, at least. It wasn't that now the next day I'm like, I believe in God and now I want to come to Bhakti Yoga. It wasn't like that. It was probably 10 years of questioning and trying to put the pieces together and understand. It wasn't so quick. Good question, thank you. Anything else before we move? Love knows no bounds. Anything online? Oh.
Yeah. It's about the boy who by hearing this voice, he was feeling very ashamed. And so my question is how the big damage can be caused only in the sense that because people are raised without love. So this lack of love can cause very, very strange and severe problems in the mind of the people. So, and then this little boy, when he said he experienced a little bit of love and attention on him, so I always wonder, I'm always in surprise how there is a way to recover even in the most difficult situation, you know. So, so just I want just to say, I observed that. That's it. It's not a real question, it's just an observation.
Yeah, everybody, I mean, love, at least what I have experienced with these kids, is that love is basically listening. You know, so just hearing his story, letting him tell his story, not telling him he's wrong, not telling him he's bad, not asking a question where I already know what the answer is, what it should be. Just letting him tell, because as he told, you know, he hadn't told anybody he was hearing voices. And I think he was already embarrassed and ashamed, because remember I told you that when I saw him the first time, he had gone to the bathroom in his pants. Because there was not one voice, there were so many that he couldn't even focus on his body, you know. That's embarrassing. He's a teenage boy. He wants to be cool, you know. It was really cool though at the end when he was discharged and he got the right medicine and we worked through all the problems and everything, that he looked so handsome, you know. He had a cute outfit on and he was ready to probably go get a girlfriend, you know. It was really nice, sweet ending for him to see.
So then I would like to understand more how these voices, they are generated inside the mind from what is the root cause of this, and from where
I think it's a little out of the scope of what we're talking about, because this is like, you know, let's stick on lessons learned from Babaji. Yeah, but research it. It's not a small topic.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's move. So our topic today is Love Knows No Bounds. It's chapter 7, and it's page 134, if you have the book. Okay? So as you have probably already gathered by now, my days teaching and counseling the kids at the psychiatric hospital in Florida included some of the most intense moments of my life. And just for the record, it's also not that I had an easy, stress-free life until then either. Oh no, I encountered some pretty extreme moments over the years that I'd lived and worked around the world. I had learned that in order to survive, I had to adapt by being flexible, open-minded, and by taking risks. Most of all, over the previous 25 years, I had learned how to understand and accept people from all walks of life. I became pretty good at fitting into almost any situation with ease and comfort, or so I thought. It was not until I had become a psychotherapist at this hospital for the severely mentally ill that I seriously questioned my ability to fit in. It had always been very easy for me to fit into almost any social situation. So what was going on here? Was it me or was it them? It felt horrible to doubt one of my qualities that I had prided myself on and taken for granted for years. So on my strong days, I protected myself by thinking that maybe the problem was with them. I would tell myself things to make myself feel better, like that these kids were so unmanageable that even their own families did not want them. So of course, the problem was not with me as a counselor. It was certainly with them. In fact, sometimes not even the foster homes nor adoption agencies had a sympathetic corner in their hearts for them. Perhaps partly due to the patient's volatile and sometimes dangerous behavior, and partly due to their lack of insight and lack of remorse for how their behavior was wreaking havoc in their loved one's or caregiver's life. This naturally made for a high-stress work environment, to say the least. For example, the most familiar sound on any typical workday was the piercing scream of yet another kid in distress. What I just want to stop and say for 1 minute is that this piece about what made it high stress, this environment, and the reason why it's important is I think it doesn't matter if you're at a psychiatric hospital, if you just have somebody in your life who has this problem, but it's a common problem where people don't have any insight into how their behavior affects others. And that gets highlighted if you're living in a community, right? Because you don't have your own private space, really. You're in a class together, you're eating together, you're socializing together, and if you don't have insight into how your behavior affects others, you're going to, number one, keep on doing it, and keep upsetting the whole group. And especially if you're in a spiritual circle, a lot of times nobody says anything. Everybody just tolerates that person, But then you don't improve, actually, because everyone else is improving, learning how to tolerate you, basically, But this is a very big issue, and this is an issue that I spent many months trying to teach last year about ahankara. That's what I was trying to teach, is that ahankara blocks your ability to see yourself. It blocks your ability to see how you affect others, And so you have to get into sattva to be able to see it, So I think that's an important one. And when you have a child who has that problem, it's because the parents didn't help them understand how they affect others. So if you're an adult with that problem, in a way it's not your fault because you didn't get the feedback as a kid. Because if your parents were attuning to you, they would in a very loving way help you see, okay, that's, when you do that, it makes so-and-so feel like that. We probably should go to apologize to that person, They help you attune. And I'm just highlighting it because it's something that every person, if you want to take one thing from Vedic psychology, that would be the best, to try to introspect on yourself and see how your behavior is affecting others and try to do something to improve yourself. But that's not typically what happens. What typically happens is we see how someone else's behavior is bad behavior and how that's annoying, and then we try to tell them what to do without realizing that would be a miracle. Imagine that you could try to tell somebody about their bad behavior and all of a sudden they're going to change. That means you have the power to change, 30 years of samskaras. It's like if you actually see what you're doing, it's like out of your frustration, probably with your own feeling that you're not able to manage your own samskara. So instead you want to tell the person, like, stop doing that, or you should be like that, or do like that. Instead of, realizing, okay, that person is how they are, and they're probably not going to change because they can't see it. So the best I can do is see how I'm getting triggered by that person and realize that's something inside of me that I could work on. And then, one way you can tell if you're improving is that you're not getting triggered as much, that you can be peaceful around people who are triggering, but it's not triggering you in the way it did because you processed your own samskara that was getting triggered, But when you work at this extreme, with these kids who have no insight, and no matter what you tell them, they still don't get it, it can be maddening. Even though I'm sitting here going, okay, I know it's my samskara of like my father who never listened to me or whatever. I'm trying to work through it, but then when you have it like 8 hours a day with these kids and they don't get it, and you're saying, but look, I have 10-page report on all the times you did that thing, and look at how you affected these people. Look at what you did, and they'll either say, no, I didn't, they'll blame, and then the worst is when we bring the parents in, because you have to do family therapy once a week to keep them in the hospital, and then the parents are the same. And I'm like, oh my God. So I'm like, if the parents can't see it, how's the kid gonna see it, It's very tricky. But that's something that, to me, that I see as a psychologist as an epidemic. Lack of insight about oneself and how you affect other people, And then you see everybody on social media, everybody's preaching about what other people should do, It's very hard to change yourself because you can't see yourself. But I only wrote a little bit of it here, but I think it's something, at least in spiritual circles, that we should all try to work on if we can, Okay. So the most familiar sound on any typical workday was this piercing screams of yet another kid in distress. The wail would echo eerily down the sanitary, uncarpeted hallways. You know how a hospital is? It's like all white floors, like marble clean, and you could just hear any noise echoing, So that's how it was, and my room was right on the hallway. So you could hear it coming in through my office, the screaming. And it would ricochet off the tile floors and the walls like a scene from an execution chamber in a bad horror movie. The sound was like, make you get chills, and it's a kid. It's so hard to hear a kid screaming, like, it sounds like they're being killed or something, They're in so much emotional pain. Try as I might, there was no type of music I could play in my office to mask those blood-curdling screams. My only solace was my basket full of chocolate, which I would dip into more than I want to admit. I had rationalized my indulgence in sweets years before, when one psychologist had provided me with justification. In my struggle through a bitter divorce, I had asked my therapist, why am I so compelled to eat chocolate like this every single day? And he simply replied, we all need a little something sweet in our lives, don't we? And he left it at that without any further explanation. My normally curious mind had lost its umph to go deeper, giving permission for his homework card's superficial words to provide enough validation for me to continue acting upon my emotional eating habit. However, despite all my sweet chocolate indulgences, there were still countless times during my first year at the hospital when I wanted to just throw in the towel. My compassion was wearing thin. There's actually something called compassion fatigue. If you're in the caregiving field, maybe you've heard of it. But that's when you have, all day long you're just hearing one person after the other, one severe story after the other, And if you're an empathetic person, you're like, oh, you feel bad. And then the next hour you've got the next person. And it starts, you can't feel like you used to feel every hour, year after year. And then you get burned out. And there's a survey you can take to see, do I have that thing? Like this caregiver burnout or compassion fatigue. It's a thing, And then if you do have it, you have to be honest and be like, okay, I have that thing. I have to take a break. I have to, like some therapists don't. And then they end up going to drinking or doing alcohol or doing drugs or just something because they feel stuck. That's their career. They don't know what else to do. So they stay in it. And some actually just quit altogether. I've met quite a few therapists who make it to like maybe the 10-year mark and then they're just done. They're fried. They don't want to hear another story, And then they'll go do something totally different. Like one person I hired last year, his job is website marketing. He was a therapist for 10 years. And now he's a website marketer. He's like, I don't want to hear about your clients. I'll try to market you because I know what you do, but I don't want to hear don't tell me too many details because he's burned out. And in a way, I don't think he dealt with it. A lot of times, that's the other thing is like when you get burned, you just jump to the next thing. That's saying out of the frying pan into the fryer. He didn't process and probably work through it in therapy. So he was really quite triggered when he was even just listening to a few of our e-courses and stuff. He was like, oh, this is too much, So being a therapist is a hard job in some ways. I love it, but for some people, it's too much. Okay. So, like I said, my compassion was wearing thin. How many more abuse cases could my heart endure hearing about? How could I help the little 8-year-old boy who brought razor blades to school and tried to cut his fellow classmates? He had already killed the family kitten by suffocating it in a backpack in a boiling hot tool shed with no remorse. Why should he feel bad when his father had done much worse things to him and his stepmother a willing accomplice? What was I supposed to do for the 14-year-old girl who was raped by her father at age 5 and whose subsequent psychotic delusions led her to believe that she had actually given birth to a baby girl from that rape? She was saying that she gave birth to a baby and she was 7. And we were like, that's not possible. But it didn't matter. It was what's called a fixed delusion. And I think I mentioned that before, but what that is you can be completely fine in your life. Like you can be going to classes, you can be doing whatever, doing your job. But this certain part of your mind that's got a fixed delusion, you think 100% that is true. And there's no talking about it in any other way. So with her, she's like, no, and I didn't realize she had a fixed delusion. So I was like, well, that's not possible. Like, let's look online. You see, like, you can't be 7 and getting pregnant because you have to have your period first. It was just like, I shouldn't have even brought it up, So a fixed delusion is no matter what you try to show them that's to the contrary, no matter what facts you show, it doesn't matter. They're completely fixed and they get very angry, So that's, like I said, when you're learning, when you're in school and you're learning about all these different ways that the mind can, variations of the mind, I guess we could say, you don't really know what it is. You're like, okay, interesting. But first of all, you have to memorize them to pass the test, to get licensed. And second of all, there's hundreds. So a lot of them, you just read it and you're like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, that. But then when you see it, I'm like, oh, because I was saying I was in supervision. So every week I'd have to meet and review each of my cases. And then I was like, and this one, I don't know what that, she was so stubborn. And they're like, my supervisor was like, that's called a fixed delusion. I'm like, oh. And then I go look it up. I'm like, okay, that's what that is, you know? So then you change your strategy. I thought she was just being stubborn or lack of insight or something. And they're like, no, that's beyond lack of insight. You know? So these cases were just so tricky because they're the hardest of the hard, you know? And they'd had many, many therapists before I got to them. That's the other thing, you know? And so they're kind of burned out on therapists, and then they know all the tricks to trick the therapist to make it look like, they know all the jargon to make it look like they've already done the work, they have all the insights. Yeah, and I was new. I mean, I was doing my hours there, my intern, so, yeah. Okay, so how could I really help the 17-year-old who had fresh self-inflicted cuts up and down her arms every time I saw her, and who regularly tried to hang herself in her hospital room? What could I do to help the 16-year-old boy who was hearing voices in his head calling him the devil and ordering him to run away? Oh, that's the other thing. You know, they weren't even allowed to have, like, they weren't even allowed to have a pair of glasses. Anything that had glass, they would break and use it to cut themselves or someone else, you know. They weren't allowed to have a pen. They weren't allowed to have a safety pen. They weren't allowed to have anything sharp. And some of them would take something that wasn't even sharp and they would make it sharp. You know, like a piece of plastic lid. And they would break it in half and cut themselves inside. I mean, this was my client. I mean, she was locked in the hospital. How is it that she could be cutting herself every day? Or how is it she got the bed sheets and hung herself? I mean, she didn't die, but they caught her. But it's just so severe, you know? If you have your mind set up to do something, it doesn't matter if you're in like basically a high security prison. You figure out a way to do it, you know? And they were on 24-hour watch. There's video cameras on them. There's security people on them. And they still were doing this kind of thing. But that's how you can tell we hadn't gotten to the root cause of the problem. You can lock them in a room, you can medicate them, but until you get into their heart, they're going to keep doing it. The voices were so disturbing that he didn't notice his physical body, not even when he was walking around covered in his own feces. How could I get through to my 16-year-old catatonic patient in diapers reeking of urine? So she was catatonic, meaning that she would, when I first saw her, they're like, oh, this is, you know, we'll just call her R. This is R. And I'm like, oh, hi, R. And she was like, no talking, no response, nothing. But she was a 16-year-old girl, you know. So I was like, well, how do you do therapy with somebody who doesn't even talk? It's not that she was deaf. I mean, she could talk, but she was in this state, you know. So I was like, what am I supposed to do, you know? And she was in diapers because she wasn't able to even control her bowel movements and her bladder. She was nonverbal, and she would sit in my office with a blank stare as drool dripped down her face and onto her shirt that was 2 sizes too small. How was I supposed to do talk therapy with someone who didn't talk? I felt overwhelmed, defeated, and helpless. And most days I just wanted to give up. I wanted to leave that place and never return. I mean, if you ever want to have your ahankar smashed, get a job at this place, you know, because it's so hard to get trained to be a therapist, you know. When you finally get all the training, you're eager to use your skills, and like everything I learned doesn't work. It's like so defeating, you know. In that first year on the job, the only thing that kept me going was a commitment I had made to myself when I first started. I had vowed to stay at the hospital for 2 years, for the 2 years required to accumulate enough hours to attain my professional state license as a psychotherapist. Once licensed, I could leave my job, as nearly all the counselors did at this training hospital, and start my private practice. I dreamed about that moment nearly every single day as I dragged myself into the hellhole that I called work. Please don't get me wrong. I felt deeply saddened for these children and their stories. And I felt a ton of respect for each and every staff member who dedicated their working hours to trying their darndest to help these kids. The only problem was with me and the extreme compassion fatigue and burnout that I was experiencing, but was unaware of at that time. Fortunately, what happened in my second year working at the hospital was an entirely different experience, one that gave me newfound hope and energy. After returning from meeting Babaji in India in January 2015, and having such success with his Hitopadesha stories with my patients, my days started getting easier. My chocolate consumption decreased. And believe it or not, I actually started looking forward to seeing the kids. These seemingly unassuming stories about animals were truly a divine intervention. For what else could have the power to open the kids' hearts and somehow, against all odds, bring out their best qualities? For the first time since working at the psychiatric hospital, I actually felt happy and optimistic that maybe, just maybe, they could get better. It's actually kind of cool that I had a year of hell first, you know? Like, I'm imagining if I already knew Babaji and I already knew the Hitopada stories and I started the job with that, I wouldn't have realized the power of them, actually, probably. Because I would have just started right away, and if they worked, I would have just done, oh yeah, the Hitopada stories work, no problem. But a year of just beating your head against the wall every day, you know, and trying any desperate thing that basically nothing's working. And every day you have to go to the rounds with the psychiatrist and be like, I tried this. And he's like, yeah, good luck with that. I'm like, I mean, he was so burned out. He was so burned out, the head of the whole hospital. Actually, on this, I'll just say quickly, but he was so burned out that he committed suicide. Yeah. While I was there working with him on a Friday, every day we met, and on a Friday we were working, and a Saturday morning I got the call that he killed himself. So he was so fried, and that's the guy leading the whole hospital. So how optimistic are we going to be going into work the next day, you know? Not only did our leader kill himself, but obviously he must have had some problem too, you know, and he was running the whole thing. So the whole place was so hard. It was hard with the kids, it was hard with him, and he would always make mean, sarcastic comments about the families and the kids. And that was not ethical at all, and not nice at all, you know what I mean? Like, we're young, and we're like young in terms of we didn't have a lot of years of practice, and he had like 25, 30 years of running that place, so we were really looking up to him for some optimism or something positive we could, you know, and he wasn't like that. We would get there and he'd have a can of, it doesn't matter, 8 a.m. when you're meeting, can of Coca-Cola and some chocolate bars, and that was his breakfast, you know? And then if you got called later in the day at lunch, he had another can of Coca-Cola. Excuse me, he was very much running on probably a lot of adrenaline and sugar and caffeine, and so it wasn't a great role model, so it was tricky. The kids were hard, the families were hard, the leadership was, you know. And then underneath him was my manager, and she was like, similar situation, not easy. You know, she wasn't balanced, you know, so that was also hard. So you didn't really have a person you could like go to and be like, your soft cushion, who could support you. And even the guy who came in from the state, from the insurance companies, you had to meet with him quite regularly, and he would analyze all your cases. And you had to prove to him that this kid deserves to still stay, this kid isn't better, please sign for another month, you know. And he would always also say negative things. So it was just, I'm getting to the happy part. I'm just laying a little bit more of the foundation before we get the breakthrough of the bright light of Babaji. Okay. So riding on this wave of hope, I threw myself completely into writing and teaching the kids the Hitopada stories. There were 6 stories in total that I was working on rewriting from Babaji's book. I had rewritten the first 3, and Babaji had read and approved each one for use. I had spent months with the kids, bringing to life each of these magnificent tales. Babaji would usually respond with some feedback for each story within a few days. However, after I sent him the 4th one, a few days had passed, and he hadn't replied. I began worrying that the story I'd written was so displeasing to him that he was angry with me. I speculated that perhaps I'd misunderstood his point, and the words I had written were a terrible representation of his material. After all, I had rewritten each of his original stories using humor to catch the kids' attention. So sometimes, you know, it was like Babaji's Hitopada stories, and then that's a big jump from the worksheets, which I already shared with you, The Tiger and the Traveler, right? So it's a big difference. And I was trying to make it funny for the kids, and I'm like, oh, I probably made some like really off-color joke that was like offensive to Babaji. That's why he's not responding, you know. But maybe what I thought was funny was offensive to him. Perhaps he felt disrespected by me, and that was why he was giving me the silent treatment. As more days passed by, my worries increased. I began feeling very anxious, thinking, what if he's not mad at me, and he's not responding for some other reason? Maybe something bad happened to him. Maybe he got hurt. I felt so uneasy. After 1 week, Babaji finally responded. He wrote just one line. I have malaria and I'm very weak in bed. Oh no, I thought. We were just getting started with our work together. What if he dies? My mind started spinning, just like my father who dropped dead from a heart attack. Now another important male figure in my life is going to suddenly leave me. I felt sad, overwhelmed, helpless, and unsure about what to do. Babaji was the only bright spot in my life. How could this be happening? And those poor kids, now they were also depending on Babaji, waiting for his next Hitopadesh story. I didn't want to proceed with reading story number 4 to the kids unless Babaji had approved it and added his pithy points as he always did. Yet I need something to share with the kids. I was worried if I didn't share a story with them, it would break their momentum and their trust. I couldn't let them down, as the previous caregivers in their lives had already hurt them so badly. For once, the kids were enthusiastic about something, and it was something stable that they could count on. From my viewpoint, these stories were really my only hope for their healing. So I did the only thing I could think of doing. I wrote a brand new story. I used the same format that I created for the Hitopadesh worksheets, which entailed short paragraphs, pictures, and discussion questions on each page. But this new story was not about an animal. No, not at all. It was about a mosquito that bit Babaji and how he got malaria as a result. I thought that if I shared Babaji's plight with the kids, maybe they could express empathy for him. You see, almost all the kids struggled with a lack of empathy. No adult had shown them love or compassion. So in turn, they didn't have empathy for others. And how do you teach a kid empathy? Is it even possible to teach empathy? Now that's a tricky one. But I saw this situation as a golden opportunity. I titled my story, On Empathy in the Bearded Babaji. I printed the story out, complete with pictures of Babaji and discussion questions on what the kids would do if they could. What would they tell Babaji who was sick in bed? And this is the story that I read on Christmas. So those of you guys who didn't hear it, it's one of the recordings. You can listen to it. That's what the recording's called, the book club recording. And for those of you who did hear it, it's just a refresher from that day. So when I arrived on that Monday for group therapy, I told the kids that I hadn't heard back from Babaji with feedback for story number 4. So we couldn't read it. They were visibly upset and they protested, "What? Why? Why didn't Babaji respond? No, we want to hear the next story. This is so unfair. Come on, Mrs. Jessica." I tried to comfort them by explaining that I had another story that we were going to read, and that in this story they could learn about why Babaji hadn't responded with feedback yet. Now that got their attention. As I passed out the worksheets in our small group circle, the mood in the room immediately changed. The kids were mesmerized by the picture of Babaji. Their complaining ceased, and they became quiet and serious, ready to dig into the story. One socially awkward boy, who usually hung back, asserted himself by pleading, "Please, can I read the first page out loud to the group? Let's get started. What happened to Babaji? I want to know." The rest of the group listened attentively as he read the first page of the story. I was surprised at how eager the children were to hear about Babaji. When they learned that he had malaria, one girl's eyes welled up with tears. She said, "Oh, I feel so bad for Babaji. He is so sweet. He doesn't deserve to have malaria." I was completely shocked. This was the same girl who had gotten a fist fight with another patient just the week before. She had such a tough exterior, but somehow hearing about Babaji melted her heart, and her mood was contagious. One by one, each kid in the group expressed their heartfelt concern for Babaji. I was blown away. These teenagers actually did have empathy. They began spontaneously asking if they could see him or if they could help him in some way. When our time was up that day, they didn't run out the door like they usually did. They lingered and kept talking about Babaji until a security guard came and escorted them to their next meeting. A few days later, at our next group, Babaji remained sick in bed, so we still had no story number 4 to read yet. But the kids didn't seem to mind, because they were more concerned about his health. That made it easy for me to use our group time for the kids to make get well soon cards for Babaji. Each child wrote out their well wishes for him on a large white heart that one of my patients had eagerly helped me cut out for the group members in advance. As the kids were writing out their messages for Babaji and decorating their hearts, my own heart began to melt. I was in awe of these kids, all survivors, with such resilient hearts that despite all odds, could open like this after enduring so much abuse. Each patient pasted their heartfelt message to Babaji on a big blue poster that they decorated with stickers. The kids' compassion for Babaji was so tremendous that it moved me to take a picture of the poster and email it to Babaji. A few days later, when Babaji was feeling better, I received an email from him. I was so touched to see that he had lovingly taken the time to write each child a personal response to their get well soon wish. In our group therapy session the next day, I told the kids that Babaji was better now, and he had written a reply to each of their get well soon messages. They were overjoyed. And this is the picture of the poster board with each of their get well soon messages. As I read Babaji's messages aloud, they were hanging on every word. They asked if they could write back to him. I think this was likely the very first time these kids had experienced a truly loving exchange with someone, and I don't blame them for wanting more. In the story I had written about Babaji, he had described what love was, and it made these young teens think twice about their perception of love. So as you can imagine, they had lots of questions about love. Each of them wrote their most burning question, and I emailed them to Babaji. Again, he so generously took the time to respond to each child. Here are his responses to each of their questions. Question from MT, age 12. And I think I read these already in the last group. I think it's the same ones. I can read it again, but I think your love is amazing. I think I would feel great, respected, and never want to leave your center if I were there. Why would you do all this about love? What made you start this? Babaji's response, Dear MT, I started this on the order of my teacher who died 2 years ago. I learned everything from him. He was a great saintly person, but always confined to his ashram. He did not travel anywhere. Question from GB, age 14. I believe that Babaji's description of true love is true. I would feel loved at his center. How do you find true love, and what is true love? Babaji's response, Dear GB, true love is feeling intimacy towards the person you love. You want to be with that person. You want to see him or her happy. By seeing him or her happy, you feel happy in your heart. You naturally think of him or her. You open your heart to that person. Question from NT, age 17. I think Babaji's true love is amazing. I would feel peaceful at Babaji's center. How do you know if you're in love? Babaji's response, Dear NT, you will feel it in your heart. You feel very happy and satisfied just by being with the person you love. You feel happy by making the person you love happy. Question from RR, age 15. I think Babaji's true love is wonderful. I'd feel amazing at his center. But why does love hurt so much? Babaji's response, Dear RR, true love never hurts. It always gives happiness inside the heart. We feel hurt because of our expectations. Question from RW, age 16. I think Babaji's center is cool, pretty right. Why does love hurt? Babaji's response, Dear RW, true love does not hurt. The nature of love is happiness. If it is hurting, then there's something wrong with it. Question from ES, age 14. Why does love fire back so much? Babaji's response, Dear ES, love fires back because of our expectations. Unconditional love is without any expectations, and thus it does not fire back. This correspondence between an Indian guru and some teenage psychiatric patients in Florida was beyond my wildest dreams. Who would have ever guessed these kids would get the chance to feel love for and receive love from a saint on the other side of the world? The seed of love that he planted in their hearts started to grow. This experience highlighted one of Babaji's core teachings, that lack of love is at the root of all unhappiness, cruelty, pain, fear, and suffering. Babaji's love had inspired these kids to believe there is such a thing as love, and that it is possible for them to feel it and act upon that feeling. Through these email exchanges with Babaji, the kids started getting better. They began caring for each other, being more sensitive, empathetic, kind, and thoughtful. Weeks and even months later, the kids would inquire as to how Babaji was doing. And even on days when they were feeling down, I observed them saying encouraging things to their peers in group therapy. This is the amazing power of true love. Even though these kids were locked in a hospital, their hearts were not, because love knows no bounds. Their hearts were set free by Babaji. Sweet story. So I'm going to share my reflection, but before that I want to give you a treat from Babaji. This is prasad from him. So love knows no bounds at the ashram either. So you can take one and pass it on, or maybe you want to share one with everybody. Oh, it's kind of heavy. Ladus from Babaji. Okay. So, oops.
For the ones online, this is Bhadra.
You just have to imagine. What does that sound, Vilas? Okay. So in terms of reflections, observing how Babaji interacted with these kids, I began to wonder how I could have done a better job with them. I wonder what it would have been like if I had met them from a place of greater compassion and not let the negative things I heard about them or experienced with them get me down. Perhaps I wouldn't have felt so burned out if I had been more open to them, accepting them as they were and not trying to change them. I wonder what it would have been like if I had tried to connect to their hearts as Babaji did so gracefully, instead of trying to protect my own heart from their attacks. Maybe then I could have relaxed and not felt so stressed out by my job. My lesson learned was to approach people with an open heart full of compassion and not with a closed defensive heart full of fear. Accept others as they are and don't try to change them. So that is chapter 7, Love Knows No Bounds. Does anybody want to share anything? What came up for you? I think it's interesting how Babaji answered many times the same thing about expectations, right? He was saying that love, in true love, you have no expectation. That's so hard to do. And when I work with clients in individual therapy, they don't realize they have the expectation. So most often, what the most common topic is relationships and therapy, right? If all your relationships are great and lovely and wonderful, you might not be coming to therapy, you know? Please don't put it on the floor. It's prasad, Babaji prasad. Okay. You can put it here. Okay. But in terms of expectations, it's hard to realize that we have expectations, you know? So it's a very subtle, because they're part of it's like our breath, you know? Like, it's very hard to realize that we have expectations. But one way to catch it, if you're interested on seeing what we mean by that, is anytime that you're feeling upset with another person or a situation, or even with yourself, criticizing yourself or someone else, that means you had something that you thought was supposed to go a certain way. Either you're supposed to act like that, or I'm supposed to act like that, or you're not supposed to act like that, or something's going on. It's an invisible expectation. So that's how you can catch what your expectation is, you know? And then you can say, okay, is that helping me? Is that expectation helping me? Because right now I'm feeling angry. And if I hold on to that expectation, it's probably not going to be getting me very far. If I'm getting angry about it, because that person's not going to change, you know? But I think that's, I don't know, expectation. It's just interesting. It kept coming up from his answer. He kept saying it, you know? And you saw the kids' questions was very similar. Why does love hurt? Why does love fire back? And the other thing I want to say about the kids that's interesting is there wasn't only one of those kids who was in psychosis when they wrote the question. So you can tell sometimes when it doesn't sound very clear what they were asking. Sounds a little off, you know. Anyway, to me, I was very proud of them that they could write a question that clear given what was going on for them mentally. And that shows also the power of them connecting to Babaji's heart, you know, connecting to love, because sometimes you can sit for a whole hour talking with them and they're not making sense at all, you know, and I would just try to be kind and provide a listening ear and let them speak. But for them to formulate a question like that I was like, oh wow, that's pretty good, you know, that you could ask it that clearly, given that, you know, because it's not like they come on day one, we diagnose, and then they get the medicine and they're fine. It takes a long time. And all of them had multiple diagnoses, and they're on multiple medications, and every day there's a different side effect. Oh, now we got to reduce that one, take them off that one. It's a whole art to get just the medicine right. Forget about the therapy and everything else you're trying to do. So it's a real hard work. Anyway, so a lot of them were work in progress. They're in the middle of their therapy. It's not that they're done. And so for them to be that clear with their questions about love was really wonderful to see, and also to see how Babaji attuned to them. How he wrote back to each one. He wrote their name, letters of their name, their initials, and he answered them so nicely, you know. It was very sweet. So I think somebody online, I can't see the name, but okay. Can you tell him?
Yes,
Hare
Billy?
Krishna, is it me?
Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
I listened to the stories with a very heavy heart. And I even have a degree. I have a master degree in pedagogy, but because of my level of awareness, what's happening in the schools, I cannot work with the children.
Oh.
I cannot agree to this level of distraction. What's going in the educational system is just completely against our nature. I was quite old when I finished the studies. I finished my studies when I actually went to study when I was 32. So I had my reflections, and after studies, it's even worse. That I feel like even though we learn to support the children and to kind of guide them, the educational system is just the opposite. It's just distraction, destroying the heart, and just creating destructive ahamkara. And now I'm 50, and I feel torn apart from inside. Because on the one hand, I try to and I'm not even talking about, helping people guide to spiritual knowledge, because that's the high level. But I even attend in men circles. That's kind of meetings for a man to kind of mature with some help of spiritual knowledge. And I see even on some basic level, so much damage is done. Like recently, I was sharing about my own experience, and people were triggered. And they start to say that I'm offending them, they feel attacked. And I was just sharing about my own experience. And so much triggers. And it makes it. I feel really confused. Should I just focus on my own process? To which extent should I just extend my hand to help? It's so confusing. I live in Northern Europe, and what I see is just paradoxical. On one hand, people suffer from loneliness. And then when I try to, just give them some support, and immediately they feel attacked. And I see so much emotional wounding.
Thank
So
you.
much fear.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for sharing. I think it's a big conversation, but probably not for this group right now because we only have a couple minutes left. But thank you for sharing. Anyone
Hare
else?
Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Kamala?
I found that a few very important key points that in your reflection when you said that from a place of greater compassion, so and then accepting them as they are and not trying to change. So when we have expectation, obviously we try to make the things going as we want, and means that we are forcing a part of our ideas on others, and this creates basically the friction and the non-contact. Basically, there is no real relation. And then I was very touched to see how Babaji, from the other side of the world, he could be so empathetic to these children, which were sitting in a very difficult situation, and touch their heart only because he could listen to them. And this was really like I was moved with tears because of that, So I found that this is a very big teaching inside. I have to try to remember that.
Yeah.
Thank you for.
Yeah, he attuned to them.
He attuned so
He
much
attuned
to them. And this attunement basically makes the
other
miracle.
person opens up, and then you feel like you're one heart.
Yeah. I mean, this is an aspect of the true love, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for bringing it up.
Yeah.
It's a big hope.
Yeah, I was surprised that he responded to each of them.
And in such
One
a
by one,
Yeah.
So sweet.
Thank you.
Those kids are lucky, very lucky, Because at that age, their minds are more open and more malleable, so they're still able to make deep samskars from that experience. As you age, your kind of personality, I don't know how to say it, but becomes a concrete block. So it's harder as an adult if you meet Babaji, like for me, to get a good samskara that's really going to penetrate my heart, because I was going against 42 years of my own conditioning. But you take a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old, they're more open, even though they're more hurt, they're more damaged, more like so much abuse but their hearts were still open somewhat because they were kids. So that's also why they were able to have empathy. Bhadra?
Yes, Hario. Yeah.
Haribo.
Pranams to you. For me, I would like to ask you about, these kids had a lot of different, in the clinic you were working, there were a lot of resources, like a lot of therapists, they received the medication, and things seemed to work. Nevertheless, when you apply the Babaji knowledge that he was giving to you, that was super effective. So what is it seems to me that the key ingredient for it to be so effective was, as you mentioned, compassion, empathy, validation. I would like if you could please elaborate more about this.
So the title of the chapter is Love Knows No Bounds, which is titled by Babaji. And the secret ingredient is love, and all those things are part of love. And even the Hitopadesh story, that was attuning to them. That was attuning, because they're kids. They like stories, And so already their heart got opened we could call it the story, but actually the story was an act of love. Because I know that they would I didn't think they'd like it that much, but I knew that would be fun for them. So I was already attuning to them with the story. So they were already opening, And then from there, you get the secret weapon of Babaji, his story, and then he was attuning to them. But the whole thing was love. We were attuning to them. We never told them they were bad, or that they were wrong, or that they need to improve, or any of that. Whatever they said, we would attune with. I mean, Babaji was even using their exact words, why does love fire back? And then he'd say, like, love fires back because it was completely attuned.
There were two things that for me were very amazing. Also, the first one is how you were describing how the therapists were super burnt out, and they were actually needing more therapy.
Yeah.
Giving. That's the first one. So how can a sick person can help a sicker person? It's like it's not possible. That was one of the things, and the other one was how clear these children understood what love was, and how like they had this conflict internal that if love is such a wonderful thing, why is it that it hurts too much? No.
Yeah.
Those were very amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhadra. Thank you for being here, everybody. Haribo.